Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's Parent Academy Power Hour. I am Keosha Simmons, Pinellas County Schools District Parent Advocate. Our goal is for each family to feel supported, to share resources, to be engaged, and to connect with like minds. I am excited to introduce our speaker for the hour. Ms. Jennifer McGinnis has worked as a school counselor for over 15 years and is now a prevention specialist with Pinellas County Schools. In this role, she has had the opportunity to learn a lot in the area of trauma, informed care, and is excited to share some of the information with us today. A few housekeeping tips before we get started. All questions can be placed in the chat. We will dedicate the last 15 or so minutes to questions and concerns. Ms. McGinnis will have some follow-up information on this as well. Please be sure to stay muted at all times. The meeting will be recorded and made available on our district website. We would love for you to have your cameras on to interact with us if possible. Thank you so much for attending. Ms. McGinnis, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, sounds good. Yes, welcome everybody. So good afternoon and welcome to our Parent Power Hour on trauma-informed care for parents, parenting during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. As Keosha said, my name is Jennifer McGinnis. I'll be presenting this information to you today. And like she said, I've worked as a school counselor for over 15 years. I'm currently working in the prevention department with Pinellas County Schools. And I also am blessed with the full-time job of being a parent to 2 kids, ages 5 and 7, so never a dull moment. I remember the first time I learned more about trauma and its impacts. I found it, and obviously continue to find it, really relevant and useful. So I'm really excited to share some of this information with you today, and I hope that you find it valuable as well. I am joined by my amazing colleague and fellow Jen Coben here. So I'll pass it over to her to introduce herself.
Hey everybody, my name is Jen Coben. I work at the district office as the district mental health support school counselor. I've been in mental health for about 8 years and a school counselor in Pinellas County for 5. I have a 3 and 5-year-old child at home. So this training, even practicing and putting it together with Jen, has been extremely informative on my own parenting techniques. I will be monitoring the chat, so that anytime you need to private message me, feel free. Or if you have any questions, I'll be handling those at the end.
Okay, let's get started. So our goal for this power hour, and we are going to power through for sure, is that by the end, you'll have a better understanding of what trauma is and the impacts that it has on the developing brain. We also want you to feel empowered and walk away with some helpful strategies for trauma-informed parenting and be able to recognize the all importance of self-care. As we go through this presentation today, please keep in mind what we're going to call our safe zone. Self-care is always important, but especially so.
Oh, unmute. They can hear.
Sorry. Especially so when we're discussing topics such as trauma. Sometimes the things discussed can cause some uncomfortable feelings. So please make sure you're taking care of yourself, take breaks when needed. And also remember, that's why we do have Jen Coben here, so that you can private chat her if at any times you do need to talk about your feelings. She is on to help. If you have just any general questions or comments, you can feel free to type them in the chat at any time, but we'll go ahead and address all of them at the end of the presentation. If you are watching this as a recording after the live session has ended, you can still contact me. I'll have my contact information up on the last slide, so you can feel free to email me with any questions. And of course, people watching on a live session, you'll have my contact info as well. Also, please keep in mind that we're all in this together, so let's remember to be respectful of anything that is asked or discussed and try to keep this a judgment-free safe zone. All right, so one of the main points of being trauma-informed is to consider it as a universal precaution. This means using the same approach with all children, whether we're aware of a traumatic experience or not. This is because all children might process things differently, regardless of their level of what we might consider trauma. And also just because the suggestions given, as Jen was saying earlier, can provide benefits to all children. I know a lot of the times when I was attending trauma trainings, I would think of my best friend, who I just consider an angel for doing this. She has fostered 2 kids who went through extreme trauma as infants and toddlers, and then was able to adopt them. But the struggle is real for her. She goes through a lot. But it's funny. So when I think about her, but then I also think about me with my own kids who have been blessed to have not been through too many traumatic experiences. However, the things that we've learned throughout this journey benefit us both. So again, just bringing us back to it being a universal precaution, good for all kids. Another key point is to look at symptoms, or what we call symptoms, more as coping mechanisms, not necessarily as pathology or something's wrong with them. And we'll talk more about that as we dive a little deeper into the subject. It's also important to note that the key to this is a collaborative and trusting relationship between the child and the caregiver, and even better when that relationship can be extended to the school. As you see here, the primary goals of being trauma-informed are to be consistent, safe, and supportive. All right, here's one of my favorite quotes. I'm not always good at it, but I love it. So when little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. A lot of times we're tempted to jump right in and join the chaos. So it's a perfect quote to start off and remind ourselves as we move through this training. And I, trust me, daily trying to remind myself of this. So let's talk about the definition of trauma, what it is. You can read here, trauma arises from an inescapable, stressful event that overwhelms an individual's coping mechanism. What does that mean? It overwhelms our ability to cope. And I like this definition because it allows for us to remember that all kids, all people really, have a different threshold for what might overwhelm our coping, a different threshold for what might be considered traumatizing to us. Also keep in mind that childhood trauma is not an event itself, but rather the response to a stressful experience. And that stressful experience could be anything from actual or threatened death or serious injury. It could also be a threat to your physical or psychological integrity, but really anything that might induce intense fear, helplessness, or horror. And again, to the point where it overwhelms the coping mechanism. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network has identified actually very many different types of trauma, but for our purposes here today, we're just going to touch on a few. Early childhood trauma, well, it's exactly as it sounds. It is trauma experienced during infancy and early childhood. There have been many famous studies done on the effects of early childhood trauma, including the famous ACEs study, which we'll touch on in a minute in the next slide. There's also complex trauma. Complex trauma is used to describe exposure to multiple traumatic events. So when there's been more than one, and it's also an integral part of the ACEs study. There's also disasters. So really relevant to us here in Florida is hurricanes, right? Could also be earthquakes, tornadoes, wildfires, really any extreme weather event that might severely disrupt the child's life or our life. And then there's generational trauma, which how can we not talk about our current COVID-19 crisis when we talk about generational? Although people, including our kiddos, are feeling its impacts at very different levels, it's no matter what, it's certainly something that's impacting this generation currently and will have lasting implications. And it's important to keep in mind that just like we are managing at an increased level of stress now, my sister put it as just a funny example. She compared always having COVID in our subconscious as a hamster, like constantly running a wheel in our minds. So even when we're not consciously thinking about COVID, it's back there and it's taking up brain space, right? One of my coworkers told a story the other day that I thought was really relevant to this. So I'm going to retell it to you guys. I'll see if I can get the details right. Basically, she was on a plane pre-COVID. And right as they were getting to their destination, the pilot came on and said, conditions just aren't safe to land. So we're going to have to circle for a while before landing. So, don't be alarmed. But of course, that's the first thing we do is, So she said, in order to try not to panic, she decided to read some of her books. She had a book with her. So she got out her book, she read her book. I want to say she said she read at least a chapter, if not more. And anyways, the plane ended up landing safely. She got safely to her destination. Point of the story is that she said it wasn't until later that night when she went to pick back up where she left off in her book, she went to read some more before bed, that she realized that she remembered none of what she read during that time on the plane. And she thought she was paying attention, but your mind's just preoccupied with other things. And I just love that example, honestly, when even just thinking of these times, because there is just a lot going on in the back of our mind. And it's important for us to remember that just like we feel that way, so do our kiddos. And although kids really are more resilient than we think, they're also dealing with a lot of change and uncertainty right now. So I feel like this just makes it an especially relevant topic for our time. Okay, so speaking of time, for the sake of time, we're not going to talk too much about this study, but it's hard to talk about trauma without at least mentioning the famous ACEs study I alluded to earlier. So ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It was a study conducted to examine the impact of negative childhood experiences and conditions on long-term health. And the ACEs fell in the study into 3 different categories: abuse, neglect, and family or household challenges. The categories captured experiences like physical and substance abuse, divorce, physical and emotional neglect, mental health illness, things like that. And what they found, the researchers, was that those with a high number of ACEs were at much greater risk for negative health outcomes, things like obesity, depression, STDs, heart disease, and even cancer. So to me, this only further proves how important it is for us to understand more about trauma and understand a little bit more how to be trauma informed and provide trauma informed care. All right, so with trauma informed care, the first thing we want to do is work to shift our thoughts and move away from thinking to ourselves, what's wrong with you? And shift our thinking to what could have happened to you. So we're just changing the way we're looking at things first. We tend to think that we show worry, fear, and anxiety like this, this little emoji, kind of common, but often for many, it might look more like this, especially a child who's experienced trauma. It could come across more as angry, non-compliant, or acting out behavior. But really at the root of it is that fear and anxiety. Just looks different than we think. So we're going to look now at how trauma impacts the developing brain. Promise I'm not going to get too sciencey for you, but it's really interesting to look at this. So basically, in a healthy stress response, it's activated when you need it and it's turned off when you don't need it. But for some traumatized children, their stress response might be in a constant state of activation, meaning they're just constantly looking out for the next potential threat, and they can't discern between a safe place and a not safe place. They're activated everywhere they are. Childhood trauma, actually, it also affects how the brain develops, making these children sometimes pre-wired into this stress response. So we're going to look a little bit more at that on this next slide. So these images that you'll see illustrate how much trauma can affect the development of the brain. I'm going to explain this to you just a little bit. Okay, so on the left, you see a healthy brain. This is the PET scan of a normal child, and you'll see that the regions of high activity, which are red, and the regions of low activity, which are blue and black. At birth, only the primitive structures, such as the brainstem, which is right in the center there, those are the only things that are fully functional at birth. In regions like the temporal lobe, which are the parts that are circled at the top there, A child's early childhood experiences are actually what wire or connect those circuits. So them just living and experiencing continues to develop and wire that brain. On the right, you see the brain of a Romanian orphan who was institutionalized shortly after birth. And you can see the extreme deprivation they suffered in infancy. You can see those temporal lobes, again, the part that's circled there, are almost completely inactive. And the temporal lobes regulate emotions and receive input from senses. So you could imagine that such children suffer severe emotional and cognitive problems. These connections were literally never formed for them, and their brains are now literally wired differently. So we can't expect them to have the same response as a child who hadn't experienced early childhood trauma. It's also important to note that when the traumatic experience happened actually dictates which regions or part of the brain were most impacted. So the only reason I tell you this is so you'll know, like for instance, if the trauma happened in infancy, like it did in this case, then all of the impacts are going to be sensory because that's where they are in their brain development. For instance, the crying baby that needs to be soothed. So that might explain sometimes the behaviors and where they're linked in their development. So again, it's not as much about what happened, but when. That's most important when we're talking about brain development. And no, we do not have to be brain scientists. And I promise I'm not going to get any deeper than that. But I feel just being aware of this phenomenon can help us understand more about the behavior of traumatized kiddos. As a matter of fact, many children might not even know the exact experience they suffered because so much can happen before we learn to store our memories as words. Think about it. If we don't know words yet, we can't store our memories that way, right? So then they get stored as feelings, or what some people call body memories. And these feelings or body memories can then be exacerbated by the actual malformation of the brain. So I know we're getting a little deep here, but I just have to tell you, if you're interested in learning more about this, there are a lot of great books out there on the topic. One really good one, but is a little deep, but good, is called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. He is a leading researcher in this field. Just a side note, if you're interested in more. But knowing this about the brain, again, is not to make us scientists, but it's just to help us understand better this behavior. And this to me is one of the many reasons why being trauma informed might not be us knowing what the actual trauma was, but just knowing that there's now an impact on the brain and how to handle it. All right, so don't panic. Don't panic, because I know a lot of this has been crazy to think about. Even though we are all experiencing some level of trauma right now, like we talked about with the COVID-19 pandemic, and although many of you might have children, including fostered or adopted, who might have been through some traumatic experiences, there is encouraging news. Research has actually proven that their brains can actually be rewired, and those connections can still be made later in life. And the most fascinating finding, in my opinion, and I literally have goosebumps telling it to you, is that the number one most important factor in this rewiring is just one caring, consistent adult in that child's life. That can make that much of a difference to like physically rewire their brain. I mean, just, I don't know, how amazing and powerful is that? It is to me. And also remember that although children can be significantly impacted by trauma, they can also be extremely resilient. And some level of stress is actually a positive force in their development. It helps them learn how to handle it, how to deal with it. But for us, knowing how it impacts the brain will help us in how to manage it. All right, so we're going to talk, I promise, only a little bit more about the brain, but this is a good one because it's going to help us when we're about to lose our minds. Hopefully it'll help you. So Dr. Dan Siegel, he uses this hand model of the brain. So I'll show it to you here too, okay? So he says that you would consider what's called the prefrontal cortex, the upstairs brain. So when this is in control is when your brain's like this, right? And your prefrontal cortex, he calls the wise leader, because you can think, you can reason, right? And then we would consider the amygdala, the downstairs brain, or the alarm center, okay? So he explains that when people flip their lid, so to speak, that the upstairs brain, or the wise leader, is no longer in control, and the fight, flight, or freeze response of the downstairs brain takes over. So they're not ready to reason in this downstairs brain. Their lid has been flipped. We're going to look a little bit more about what this means. And I'm sorry if this slide's hard to read, but I'm going to read it to you. Okay, so basically when the upstairs brain, or the wise leader, is in control, we can think before we act. We're in control of our body and our reactions. We can focus. We can see others' point of view. We can think before we speak, and we feel like we can concentrate generally and get work done, right? But once that lid is flipped and our downstairs brain is in control, this is when a lot of times we're acting before we think. We're not in control of our body or reactions. We might feel too tired or stressed to focus. A lot of times this is when yelling, screaming, arguing, running away happens, because we're not in that wise leader. Our lid's been flipped. We're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. So what does this mean for us when we're handling a kiddo with a flipped lid? Well, let's talk about that. So this helps us understand, first of all, that we're not going to be able to effectively discipline a misbehavior when their lid is flipped. We're not going to be able to reason with them, and we're not going to be able to get them to understand. However, this is not to say that we shouldn't correct the behavior. It simply means that we need to bring them back down to a de-escalated state so that upstairs brain can take back over. Once we can get the wise leader, so to speak, back in control, then we can better effectively address that misbehavior. So then the question is, well, how do we de-escalate when a lid is flipped? So we're going to look at a few ways here. I literally thought of this when I went to the bathroom right before this started, so it's not on the screen, but I want to say this first and foremost because I feel like it'll help in dealing with our kiddos with a flipped lid, but also just life in general. If you think about it, most of the time, we just want to feel heard. I don't remember what book I read this in, but they called it the fast food rule, which is the first thing you do is just repeat what the person said so they know you hear them. You don't have to agree with them, right? So if they're like, I hate my life is terrible, my reaction would be in that moment to be like, are you kidding me? You know, and then flip my lid. But instead I'd be like, oh, so you hate your life? Things are bad right now. And so I hear you. Let's talk about that in a minute, right? So you're hearing them, you're addressing what they're saying, not necessarily agreeing with it. And then we can try these ways to de-escalate. There's actually so many great books and resources on this topic, and you might find options that work better for you than the ones I'm going to give you here. But I wanted to give you at least a handful so you can walk away from this training with some strategies that you could try. Okay. So the first one is literally just thinking about numbers. Ask them to repeat their phone number if they're an age where they know your number, or really simple math problems. Anything to get them thinking about numbers. Don't ask them a math problem that's at their level cognitively for school yet or anything, because the point isn't to confuse them and get them upset, but just something easy to get numbers on their mind. And yes, in case you're wondering, all of these can work for ourselves to do when our lids flip too, which we'll talk about later, and have done them. But yeah, thinking about numbers. Another cool one I learned recently, but side note, still cannot do, is this alphabet numbers activity. So I'm gonna try to show it to you while I explain it to you. So, and this is what we're gonna try to encourage our kids to do if their lids flip. So you're gonna draw the letter while you say the number one. So like A is with 1, B is with 2, C is with 3. So I'm going to draw A and say 1. Then I'm going to draw B and say 2. Then I'm going to draw C and say 3. But you do this to yourself, obviously. I thought that sounded like a piece of cake. I don't even think I made it past M. It gets a little tricky as you go on, and it definitely starts to activate different parts of your brain. Remember, the goal of all of this is to get us out of the downstairs and back to the upstairs, right? Another one that I'll include kind of with that, and again, I thought of it after I made this PowerPoint presentation. I just learned it. And I actually did this with my daughter the other day. We were waiting for her to get nothing major, but a minor medical procedure that she was super scared of. And so while we were sitting in the room, we did this together and we were both laughing hysterically. So you put both your hands in fist. You can try it if you want, if you're brave. Okay, so on one hand, you put your thumb up. On the other hand, you put your pinky down. And then the goal is to try to keep alternating them as fast as you can. So I'm going to switch this hand to my pinky, this hand to my thumb, and then switch. And that's I'm actually doing it right now, but most of the time I cannot. Oh, there. See, I just messed up. It is so tricky, and it really definitely gets your brain working in a different space and might even make you laugh. There's also Peace Begins With Me. I actually learned this from my kids. They both learned it at their schools respectively, which I thought was kind of cool. And I like this because it also is a method of teaching them some mindfulness. But all you do is repeat the mantra, peace begins with me, as you touch your thumb to each finger. And you can do it on both hands or just one hand, but peace begins with me. And you just keep repeating it. I've done this many times as a parent, for sure. But also I love teaching it to my kids. It's cool because it's not only a way to de-escalate, but again, like I said, a way to start teaching mindfulness. Okay, so something that's really important to keep in mind though is sometimes they might be way too escalated to even start using words to get them to do these strategies. And if that's the case, you might have to stick strictly to sensory. And I'm going to show you some sensory examples on the next slide in a minute. But first, I wanted to talk to you about mirroring. Okay, so basically mirroring is just a way to try to regain a connection with them without words. And basically what you want to do is just try to mimic or match their movement. And be careful not to be doing it in a condescending way, but in a way where you're just trying to, for lack of a better word, meet them where they are, right? So if your child's rocking like this, they're upset and they're rocking, maybe you, not quickly, but you slowly start moving your body until you're kind of matching them. Or say they're laying on the ground upset. Maybe you slowly kind of work your way to the ground until you're laying there with them. Now, of course, please keep your safety in mind, safety first, and use your own judgment. Every household's different, but really just take this simply as a possible method of non-verbally communicating with your child that you are with them, okay? And then something we've been suggesting for teachers when we do this training for the classroom is to have a calm down corner or a calm down area. And I think it'd be a super great thing to have at home too. So having basically somewhere in the house where they know they can go to choose from some different soothing activities, separate from a timeout area. We don't want it to be a punishment, but a place they can go to know that they can de-escalate themselves. If you're a Pinterester, there's tons of great ideas on there, or you can even just Google it. I Googled it to find the one that I liked. There's tons of great suggestions. And I really, if you have the time, I really suggest you just looking through them, seeing what works for you. There's some cute posters that you can put up that's kind of like showing a menu of options of what they could do. It might include some of these, like alphabet or peace begins with me. It could include things like push the wall, because sometimes, I mean, think about it, even as adults, sometimes we get so upset that we just have to do something physical, right? Push the wall, it's just pushing the wall as hard as you can for a certain amount of seconds, or pushing your hands together and then trying to pull them apart. And so it can give a menu option of different things like that they could choose from. You might even have, I don't know if you guys have seen those, they're called calm down jars, but they're like those plastic water bottles that you put glue and glitter in, and they can watch it go both ways. In my daughter's classroom, they have a Rubik's Cube. That's good because that's, again, stimulating that numbers part of the brain. Again, though, it has to be what fits best for your situation. If you know that that bottle is just going to get thrown at you, don't put it there. It's finding what works for you. And we do have some resources that we're going to provide you guys at the end of this, just a couple of the things that I've referenced. And there's an example of a poster that you could use. But again, there's tons of them. So I definitely suggest you finding what works for you. Okay, so some easy physical activities, if they are just in that sensory stage and we're not able to talk to them yet to try to get them to do any of those other activities, you can do things simply like running in place. Don't make it run away, but run it out just in place. If you have a swing set, swinging's good and the rhythm of it's good. Jumping rope, because that takes some coordination. Hopping takes some coordination too. So you can try alternating legs, skipping, marching. I know for me, like, if we all just started skipping around my house, that alone would probably bring them back down because they'd be laughing, like, why are we all skipping around my house? But it's still something physical and it's activating that other part of the brain. So while it's important to remember that we want to de-escalate without language first, once we can start talking, we also want to be really careful with our words. We want to avoid asking why, and we want to instead give them open-ended options like, you seem upset, or I noticed you seem upset. Tell me about what's happening. We also want to encourage them to respond using I statements as much as possible, which they are also learning in school now, so should coincide with that. In order to work to counteract adverse childhood experiences, we want to remember that, of course, safety is first. Our goal is to provide calm, back to that quote. We want to share our calm, not join their chaos. We want to be predictable, try to praise in public and save correction for private as much as possible. Trust me, I know we talked about it earlier, how a lot of times they save their meltdowns for publics. It happens. But as much as possible, we want to try to correct in private. And our goal is also to build resiliency for them. So now we're going to talk about the importance of our awareness of our own stress response, because really, how can we effectively manage a child's stress response if our own's been activated? And it happens, right? Both of us with flipped lids, not going to go well. So as we can see on the next slide, parenting isn't easy. In fact, it's a real struggle at times. We're human. Please keep in mind as we move through this that we are not going to be perfect, and that's okay. Our goal is to do the best we can as often as we can. But let's be honest, like I said earlier, oftentimes we flip our lid too. I know for me, it often happens as a result of my child's flipped lid. And again, brings me back to that quote at the beginning, we don't want to join their chaos. So therefore, it's really important that we take some time to address what things we find stressful, what makes us flip. Because when we can look at this critically, it might help us be more proactive so we can plan and be prepared for these stressful situations as they arise, because we know they're going to arise, right? We're parents. And I know for me personally, when I started really thinking more about this and being more aware, what I learned was that I have a lot of patience. I really do. I was kind of proud of how much patience I realized I had, but I wasn't able to feel when it was about to run out. I didn't have that little warning signal, like the patience is almost gone, until it was too late and my head spun around 3 times and yelling, possibly profanity might have taken over. And so I'm like, wait, I didn't even feel like that was about to happen, right? I mean, I have laughed out loud at myself for catching myself going, stop yelling at each other. I'm like, wait, I just yelled at them to stop yelling. It happens, right? So for me, it was more trying to really notice when that gauge was running low, when that patience was about to run out. So all this to say that planning ahead can really make a big difference. Your awareness and your planning ahead. Just like, if we hear hurricanes coming, we all run and get our water and toilet paper, whatever else we need. We can also try to prepare as much as we can for these challenging incidents because we know they're going to happen, right? So a great suggestion is to work with your child when they're calm. Talk with them to come up with what outlets do they think might help them when they're upset. Do they like to draw? Do they want to walk? What will help them? Because them having a voice and planning what to do when they're upset will help them feel more in control too. Also, when an incident is over and everybody's calm, you want to make sure to provide really explicit feedback. Like, here's what you did. Here's what you should have done. And this is how we can do that better next time, because they want to learn this too. Remember, most children don't like feeling out of control either. And it might scare some of them. I mean, I don't even think we as adults like feeling out of control. The kids don't like it either. So to know that they're having a voice in their planning in this helps too. So once you have de-escalated, because remember, that always comes first, you also want to be prepared for giving consequences. So that's on the next slide. So exposure to trauma does not equate to a free pass to act inappropriately. Consequences should still be given. They should be pre-planned as much as possible. My inspiring coworker here, Jen, shared with me that they already have like a menu of outlined consequences over common issues. So her kids, they already know what their consequence is going to be before they act in many cases. I'm gonna have to try that, Jen. I like that. But so having them pre-planned and pre-known as much as possible. It's also best if they're natural. Don't forget to keep them reasonable. And when I say reasonable, don't forget something you can live with too, because how many times have we punished them and it ends up punishing us more, right? So that's why thinking of it in advance instead of when we're upset and take away the world will help. It's also great if they can be restorative and instructive. So an example of that might be writing an apology letter to whoever's feelings they might have hurt. Maybe your child likes writing books and they can write a story on handling anger, something that can help them feel instructive and restorative as well, because helping your child understand the impact that their behavior had on others will also help to build empathy, which is huge. Okay, so this slide is actually a video that we do not have time to watch, but I wanted to mention. First though, I just have to take a second to appreciate the silly Will Ferrell picture. Can't help it. Do you guys remember those pictures? And I love the stress spelled backwards equals desserts. Guess that's maybe why we crave them when we're stressed. Makes sense to me. But anyway, so this video that we're not going to watch is going to be included in the resources that we send you. It's actually a TED Talk. And it talks about how turning our stress into positive stress can not only help us kind of reframe our thinking, but also help our physical health. That's pretty interesting. If you have time, check it out. If you're like me, you might have pictured self-care as like, I don't know, pedicures, retail therapy, or meditating all day, or other things that I just felt I didn't have the time or the money to do. But true self-care really doesn't have to cost money or even take up too much time. Really, it's things like prioritizing your health, taking the time to connect with someone, practicing gratitude, trying a new activity or reinforcing an activity you're already good at. Those are really simple ways to practice self-care. And everyone's idea of what self-care might look like might be different for everybody. Some of you might like to garden. Some people like to kayak or find other ways to connect with nature. Some might rather write, draw, or other artistic outlets. An important one to me for us to remember is limit setting. It is okay to set boundaries and stick with them. Even most important, stick with them. Say no to a birthday party if you have too much going on. Say no to the extra work project if you know you're overwhelmed. Limit setting is a really important one. And if you think about it, we were all kind of forced to slow down this past year. So we can really work now to kind of keep that going by limiting our new weekend or new commitments so we don't overwhelm ourselves or our kiddos. We're also going to touch on positive affirmations, different relaxation techniques, and mindfulness. So I don't know how many of you remember this. I might be aging myself here. But this was an old SNL skit all about positive affirmations. That's Stuart Smalley, if you don't know. But really, besides the silliness, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that practicing positive affirmations can be super beneficial. And although they can sometimes feel uncomfortable, they're easy and free and quick. And I'm going to show you some apps at the end that might make this practice a little easier for you. All right, and mindfulness. This has definitely been a buzzword lately and has been gaining in popularity for good reason. It is essentially the act of consciously focusing your mind in the present. So if you're like me, the person on the right of this next image is much more how I picture mindful, right? Than the one on the left, who's really just appreciating the moment. But to me, this image helps us see what it looks like to just be in the moment that you're in and not thinking about the 5 other things that you have to do or the 5 other things that are going on. Honestly, even sometimes just picturing this picture when you're feeling that way can help you bring you back to the moment and help your mind to stop racing in those times. Mindfulness practices can help us increase our ability to regulate emotions. They help decrease stress, anxiety, depression, you name it. As we become more present in our lives, it can really help us make better decisions, manage our emotions, and really just more fully engage in life in general. So you might be thinking, well, this all sounds great, but I still don't have time. I'm a parent. I totally thought the same thing until I heard from a few different perspectives, some really practical, easy, and fast ways to incorporate it. And I'm telling you fast, because trust me, I'm all about time too. So we're going to include in the resources the links to these videos that you see here. They're all TED Talks, and most of them are around 15 minutes. Some are a little longer or shorter, but they're all really good. So if you get a chance to watch those, they give some great, easy suggestions. For the sake of time, we just didn't have time to watch one today, but I would encourage you. And another form of self-care is just finding support from others. Take the time to connect with your family and your friends, especially coworkers or others with shared experiences. They understand what you're going through. For those of you dealing with kids who have dealt with a lot of trauma, especially fostered or adopted, there's a really great network out there called the Attachment Trauma Network. I'm going to send that with the resources as well, and I highly recommend it. Many of you might have a support network within a spiritual group. That's great too. And it might just be the counselor in me, but I really believe that just like everyone has a primary care doctor, everyone should have a counselor that they can talk to when they need it. I'm a firm believer that having someone non-biased, can't go back and tell your family what you're upset about, and trained in helping you work through some stressful situations can be really beneficial. A lot of employers offer sessions through an employee assistant program, but if not, there's also many agencies in our area who offer free or reduced sessions to those who qualify. And to me, that's such an important aspect of self-care. And then also one for your traumatized children as well. So all this to say, whatever you decide to do for your self-care, take the time to really make a plan, and even better, put it in writing. It'll only take a minute. You can do it right after this. Make a little contract to yourself. I'm going to, whatever it is, spend more time with family, be outside more, and try a few of these mindfulness techniques. I mean, really, you're worth it. And it also reminds me of the airplane oxygen mask rule, right? Like you have to put yours on before you put your child's on. And that's because if we can't breathe, we can't take care of them. Same thing. If we're not well, how are we going to take care of our kids and help them? And I love this quote here: taking care of myself doesn't mean me first, it means me too. I love that. It's perfect. These are a few apps that you can use on any of your electronic devices to assist with any like self-care or relaxation strategies. Not necessarily endorsing these, just wanted to give you some ideas of what's out there. And there's new ones out there every day as well. Most of these types of apps have a free trial period. And so I kind of suggest just trying out a few to see what works for you, but some of them are paid after the free trial. And I've tried a few, and some of them I'm like, this is great, but it's not worth it. And some of them I've tried and I'm like, this is changing my life, totally worth it. And this will be on the PowerPoint that we'll give you access to if you need. But really, there's tons of apps out there. It's just finding what you like. So I hope I didn't talk too fast. Thank you so much for your time and attention this afternoon. I know it's hard to give up a lunch break. I hope you were able to gain some beneficial knowledge. You can see my contact information here on the screen. You can always feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I'm happy to help as best I can. A lot of your help for your kiddo might be school-based, but I can at least help you connect to that if you need help with that. And so I guess now we're going to address any questions you guys might have. Not sure how many were in the chat or how many you might have saved till the end. What do you got, Jen?
No questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. Quiet group. Okay, well, does anybody have any questions now for us? And you can chat them or you can unmute. I'm fine with either way.
I have a question. The information about the brain relates to the trauma at varying degrees of a child's life. Is shared with our instructional staff?
Yes, we offer actually 3 trauma-informed care trainings for our instructional staff. Right now, they're just voluntary. So they do offer ESE component points, which helps us get some people. But so far, they've all been really well attended. And yes, it does include information on that. And in the teacher trainings, we give more specific classroom strategies. So what the teachers can do to help make their classroom more sensitive to trauma and give more trauma-informed care strategies to them for the school environment.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I can try to answer.
I just have a quick question. I have a girlfriend, she has a 9-year-old now, and it's been some time I've had concerns as he gets older, the danger. And she hasn't been therapy, but he's a handful for her. And I think because, and you know, of course we love our kids, but because of her love, and she's constantly making excuses for some of his behaviors. Do you have any suggestions? Because, you know, he's been diagnosed with ADHD and also I think it's CCOD. Yeah, where he has some serious combative issues. But any suggestions?
Well, I'm glad that he's in counseling, and I think it might be worth for her to ask their counselor if you know, they're familiar with any good trauma-informed strategies. Because honestly, not that it's the be-all end-all, but a lot of the things that we talked about here, remembering to de-escalate them first, de-escalate before you're managing the behavior, because sometimes we try to manage it when their lid's flipped, and that's just going to create them to escalate more and more. So no, there's no perfect, great, easy solution, but I'm glad that his mom is attentive enough to have him in counseling. I'd continue that. And I would just keep in mind that sometimes these strategies take time and they're hard, but they do help. There's also, and I don't want to take away from the counselor that he has currently, but there are also counselors in the area who are specifically trained in handling children who've experienced trauma. So I don't know his specific situation or if any of that might apply, but that's a thought too. And even the counselor you're going to might know more about that. I would just say for her to continue what she's doing. It's a hard road. My girlfriend who has the 2 adopted kids is dealing with similar issues, and it's not easy, but staying that caring, consistent adult, and it sounds like he's got multiple caring adults in his life, which so he's lucky to have you too. So I would continue in the counseling, and I would also maybe ask them or look at some more resources for helping with sensory issues, helping to de-escalate. A lot of times that's what we're missing.
Okay, because she's getting to the point, I mean, I'm actually being her support. I'm here in Florida, she's in New Jersey, but I'm being her support adult-wise. And she's to the point where she is flipping her lid and playing into him a lot, because, you know, now it's to the I hate you and I'll kill you things. And I'm asking her, what is the therapist saying? And she's like, well, the therapist is kind of flipping it off where I'm concerned, you know? So, I mean, what point I hate to sound like have them removed out the home, but at what point do you worry about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's concerning all the time. I don't think you should ever not worry about it.
Okay.
encourage her to find a counselor for herself as well. Because like we were talking about, we can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Yeah.
Like her tank's probably getting pretty close to empty, and it's hard being a parent, especially when we're dealing with a lot of challenging behaviors from our kids. It's hard. So whatever she can do to try to start filling her cup back up, even just a little, so there's even left to help with his. And if the counselor isn't feeling like it's beneficial, I would definitely have a talk with them, make sure it's the right fit. Jen, do you have any other?
That's what I told her, and I thank you. That's what it's like medicine. You know, it's not all medicine will work. So not all therapists are, you know, and she's been through a few, but I thank you for your input.
It's hard to find the right one. It is. And I'm a counselor and I love counselors, but it's all about finding the right match, right? Who you trust, connect with, and then also one who's helpful for you. And sometimes it's hard to find that right match, but once you do, it can be life-changing. Sometimes the things take time. So.
And all counselors, I mean, we go through the training where, you know, if we're not the right fit, it's going to be more detrimental to the clients rather than saying, hey, this is the right fit, maybe let's find somebody else. You know, if the mom is not feeling heard and it's not helping, then maybe a different counselor. But I would strongly encourage doing not only individual counseling for the mom and the child, but also family counseling, so they can work through some of those strategies together, but then also sharing what those strategies with the school, so that the school can, everywhere that child goes, he's getting the same verbiage, the same strategies from every adult, will also help support the behavior.
Well, thank you for that. She's actually had to remove him from school. She's tried 3 different schools, and you know, and they're special schools. So it's really to a severe point. That was the reason I tuned in today. I was like, oh, maybe I can find her something. But I thank you, ladies.
I would look at, in the resources that I think Kiosha just dropped in, is the Attachment Trauma Network. I would check that out. Whether you think trauma is implicated or not, I would definitely check it out, because there's also links to other great resources that might help her. So I would definitely take the time to do that.
And where is that?
I think she just put it in the chat box. Did you, Kiosha?
Oh, yes.
She did.
Yeah, so if you open up your chat box, it's a Word document and you can just save it to your device of choice. We will also post it on our PCSB page. If you would like, you can also email or chat in the chat, provide me with your email, and we can email the document to you as well.
Oh, yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Absolutely.
I'll just say too, because I'm sure you're not the only one struggling with this, is it's a journey. It's a journey. I just got out of like a 3-day conference. It was actually given through the Attachment Trauma Network. And one of the speakers was a doctor in behavior science. She was a principal at a school, but also had her doctorate in behavior science and adopted a child who she knew had suffered some trauma in early life. And in her mind, and she spoke about this, she's like, I thought I was ready. I thought I was ready. I had my methods ready. I had my support system ready. She's like, but the behaviors that he threw at me, like, it was sometimes embarrassing. And I honestly didn't even know how to handle it. And she said it was very humbling to have to kind of go backwards and relearn some things. And that's when she really started on her journey of trauma-informed care. And she mentions how it is a struggle, and it's going to be a struggle. So finding that support network and finding that group that can help you. And for her, it was the Attachment Trauma Network, but whoever it is that can help you work through those things, because there's no quick, easy fix. But
right. Thank you so much.
It's just that love and that consistency, and it's taking care of ourselves so we can give that, because it's easy to run on empty.
Yeah, and poor baby. Yeah, I feel for both of them, but you know, she's not giving up, and I applaud her for that. He was adopted as a baby, so you know, the genetic makeup also, you know, and me being in the medical field, I was a neonatal nurse for 16 years, and unfortunately, I'm not able to offer a whole lot of support in those areas. But that, like I said, that's what made me tune into today, is to listen and try to get some. So this is definitely, I got this website link, and hopefully she can reach out. I thank you, ladies.
I hope she does. A bunch of people spoke about how much it helped them. So thank you.
Okay.
I tuned in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions or comments?
I do. The situation that the lady before me was explaining, I've actually got a child that I struggle with, that's pretty severe. I've had to have him hospitalized. He's been suicidal. He's threatened others. And my thing is, it starts as soon as he wakes up. How I wake up every morning and I'm sick to my stomach because I'm worried about what little boy I'm gonna get. And I've tried everything. I've tried all the suggestions, and no matter what, it all backfires. And I don't know what to do at this point.
I'm so sorry. That is so hard. I mean, I would say the same thing. I would say really trying to find a network, try that attachment trauma network. They have really great resources, suggestions for counselors in the area. Know that it's not your fault. Know that
We're both in therapy. He's in therapy twice a week, and I'm in therapy once a week.
good. Yes, I'm glad you're seeking out that help. I'm so sorry you're going through it. Again, I wish there was a quick, easy fix I could give you, but it sounds like you're reaching out, you're trying to get help. I would, if I was you, and I don't mean to keep referring to this like it's the, you know, the gospel, but I've heard just such great things about the Attachment Trauma Network and the resources that they're able to link people to. So, I mean, in my mind, it couldn't hurt. And if nothing else, it'll help you know that you're not alone in the stress that you're feeling every day when you wake up, and you can connect with other people and find out what they're doing to help themselves, what's helping with their situations. I think a lot of times we forget how important it is to talk with people with shared experience. I hear teachers say all the time how much they learn from each other, how much they learn from hearing about what each other is doing more than hearing from a so-called, you know, expert. So I don't know if you're religious. I'll pray for you. I'll keep you in my thoughts, but I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. I'm glad he has a parent who's caring. I'm glad you tuned in. I hope you continue with the counseling and definitely check out those resources.
Thank you.
If you ever need assistance, you know, on the school level specifically, you can always reach out to our office. You can reach out to the school directly for additional supports as well.
Yes. And I also saw someone just posted in the chat, we have some community resources with us here today.
Okay, so in the chat, it says that I work for Family Resources and we offer free counseling for children ages 6 through 18 years of age. We also have a program called SNAP, and they offer 13-week sessions for children who have difficult behaviors. So that may be another, you know, something that you or anyone else can look into as well.
He does excellent in school. We have no problems at this point. So, and I've done SNAP with him before. I don't know why the school hasn't offered it again.
That is good, that he is performing well in school. I would definitely say, you know, look into the information that Jennifer provided as an additional resource and support. The community always helps to have the community.
Thank you.
Might also be beneficial to talk to his current therapist to add some maybe trauma techniques to their sessions. Again, it may not be something that's glaringly obvious, like, oh, he definitely experienced trauma, but something's going up when he's sleeping. So maybe adding some different approaches to their therapy sessions, even little changes could help dramatically. But that's something you can bring up with their therapist, or maybe they can consult a coworker who has a different, slightly different technique to support him. especially in those mornings, to kind of get him regulated. So maybe it could be a mindfulness technique he does the very first thing he wakes up. So he's able to kind of tune into his own body and his own needs to start his day off.
Oh, I've even seen, and I'm sorry, I feel like I keep talking about this so much, but I even saw on the Attachment Trauma Network a link to a new type of therapy where they actually have them watching like videos, and based on their responses to it, it's literally helping that brain rewiring that we were talking about. So there's so much new science in this field, and there's so many new techniques for counselors. So yeah, it's definitely something to look into. And thank you. Yeah, I think I saw in the chat for you to reach out again to Family Services if you still need that.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question in the chat about how often a child's diet or nutrition level becomes a focus to correct or adjust mental health. I would say it's extremely important. It gets kind of lost in translation when you're working with the pediatrician and they're very focused on just the symptoms they're seeing. And a therapist may not always bring that into a factor, but being aware of what your child's eating, how they react. So if you know you're going to give them those cookies and you know they're just going to be off the chain and their lid's going to be flipped, you're not going to reason with a child who's just sugared up. But when you are making sure to bring this up when you are talking with the pediatrician or you are talking with the child's therapist, okay, I'm noticing when they eat dairy, they tend to just be a little bit moodier and they don't really want to hear what's going on. And the key for every adult that's working with the child is to look at them at a holistic level. You want to look at academics, you want to look at extracurriculars, you want to look at what's going in and going out of their body. And it's just hard. It's kind of just a new approach and incorporating all the different helping professions, but you want to make sure that it is important, everything about the child. And those little things that don't pop up, like, you're going to give the kid the cookie and your days, it might shut them up for a couple of minutes, but your afternoon's ruined after they eat the Oreo. I mean,
That is
I will,
very true.
I will give
That's
them the
very
cookie.
true.
I mean, my husband's military and gone a lot, so I will give them the thing I know that is going to give me the headache later, so I can have 5 minutes to unflip my lid so we can kind of move forward from that. But
That's kind of exactly what I do.
yeah, sometimes honestly you have to survive as a parent and you have to let that guilt go. So it's one of those, like, how am I going to be the best parent this afternoon, and we're going to just survive each other. And the whole thing with the COVID pandemic, we have to give ourselves grace and we have to give everyone a little bit of leeway and let go of that parent guilt. We cannot be the person that gives our own parent guilt, because we're doing the best we can in what we're given. And in the end, were our kids happy and healthy and loved? That's really all that matters.
Okay, thank you.
You're absolutely right, Jennifer, about that, because that was one thing I had told her early last year, and by her following up, she found out he had diabetes. So you're absolutely right. It is everything. We are eat, and they do have reaction. I agree with that.
It's wonderful information. Thank you so much. We are actually over our time limit, and this conversation has
Thank you,
been
ladies.
rich. Thank you so much. And we are grateful. Jennifer McGinnis and also Jennifer Coben, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to provide such meaningful information. Please know that this information will be available on our website, which is found under the Office of Strategic Partnerships under the direction of Dr. Valerie Brim. Again, thank you to each of you for taking time out of your day to learn about such an important topic. We wish you all a great afternoon and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate you.